So welcome all. I am Heather from Horror Girly. If you love talking about horror as much as I do, don't forget to hit subscribe and the little bell icon to get notifications of when I upload a video. Today I'm really excited because I'm talking to Justin McConnell, who is, if you didn't know, a horror director and is the director and creator of Clapboard Jungle. Get my teeth in straight, that would help, which documents his effectively his efforts to get a film from idea to its eventual screening at a festival and distribution. So I have all the questions. So Justin, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me here.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, as probably people can tell from the fangirling approach that's going on here, not only am I a blogger and now critic, but I'm an aspiring filmmaker. So this is I'm going to pick your brains.
Have you made any shorts or any films at this point?
Not yet. So
Okay.
I am literally right at the beginning, where I am the fan who has had nothing to do with the film industry, who's gone after having quite a traumatic year, which we won't go into, but it just made me really realize I've got to do it, even if and I've got to see one of my creations on screen, even if it is only a short, but there's more to that. So I'm very much, even before your process, right back, so the beginning of Clapboard Jungle, it documents how you've been enthusiastic about making films since you were 15, and it shows that you, by the time you started Clapboard Jungle and the document of that journey, you'd had a lot of experience. As you said, you'd already been living the dream, whereas I'm right at the start, and I imagine a lot of people watching Clapboard Jungle, and certainly any aspiring filmmakers should watch it, will be in the position of that I am, which is like, I have no, well, actually, I'm not going to say I have no idea what I'm doing, but certainly when I started the blog, I had no idea what I'm doing. So I had all the questions. You've done the hard work for me in talking to the greats within the horror genre. You start at the beginning by talking about your personal journey in brief, and I wanted to hear so much more about it. So you talk about how you really felt that passion in your soul for filmmaking, and then you were met with a period of crushing defeat, and you mentioned like you gained a huge amount of weight. You know, clearly it was a devastating period in your life, but then you picked yourself back up. So can you take us back there to when that turning point where you absolutely thought you'd failed, and how you built yourself up again?
Well, I think hindsight's given me a lot of context on that, because when I was in it, it wasn't just a period of thinking I'd failed in my career, because I in the back of my mind, or I guess in my subconscious, I always still had that sort of voice going, well, no, this is a speed bump. It was on a more personal level, I was in a really rough place. Basically, I guess the long story short is that I had a lot of ambition beyond my capability in the mid 2000s. I would phrase it that way. Where because I was younger and because I had a decent amount of praise for the short form work I was doing, and I had managed to get Working Class Rockstar done, which was a feature documentary that did all right distribution, but I ended up getting conned out of some money, and there's a whole there's a whole story about with that one too. It was like a crash course in just how bad business can be and how much you can get screwed over even after you get signed to distributors, or how many sharks are out there actually just looking to take advantage of young filmmakers and stuff like that.
I am going to want you to explore that in a bit more, so we will come back to that, definitely. Okay. So yeah, we'll
talk about that. So I came out of that, and then I figured, okay, well, I made this short film called Ending the Eternal, and it had done really well in festivals, and the creative team around me and myself thought that the idea was really good enough to expand into a feature of some kind. So we wrote a feature, we started shopping it around. And in the path of shopping that around, this is the first thing I ever tried to make from the ground up, like to get into development, to start casting, to raise money. It was the first thing I ever took to film markets. So my first time going to the American film market was in 2009, I believe. Yeah, it was 2009. I was shopping it around, and I had great meetings, like awesome meetings. And out of that market and around that time, we ended up getting halfway to like $3 million, which was a decent amount of money. Like that's a significant budget. In hindsight, I will add that had I actually got the movie made then, I feel like I probably would have made a bad film because I didn't have the experience, and I would have been very green going in and not understanding a goddamn thing. But I had a lot of ambition to do it, and the idea was good, and I think the script is pretty solid. And anyway, so the recession hit in mid 2009, and everybody who was at the table who had, put up little pieces of offers to get this movie made, all sort of regrouped and pulled all their investment offers back because everybody was losing their shirt and people were jumping off of buildings and stuff because that's how bad the financial market was at the time. So it took I kept shopping and I kept shopping the Eternal around. And we had a whole other second set of cast attached to it. And we got close again. And it was sort of this roller coaster trying to get this bigger movie made. But I realized that I didn't have any real track record. Like I didn't have a narrative feature film, especially a horror film that I could use to prove to people that, hey, look, I can make a movie. So my next goal was to make a really low budget film, which was The Collapsed, that I could bring to the film market and sell worldwide. So I did that. I basically, using very, 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 very little money, I went and first of all, I went out and I figured out, talking to a sales agent, basically, how much money can a tiny movie like this actually make in the market? So I knew that if I was going to borrow money, I would definitely get that money back to people. And then I went and I borrowed $40,000 Canadian. And I went out and I shot the movie for that price. And then we took a rough cut of the movie, Raven Banner signed it on, and then they sold it to Japan, and that gave me enough money to finish the movie. And then gradually over about a year or so, a couple of years, it sold to like Anchor Bay for a bunch of territories, Lionsgate for the UK. And we made way more money back than the movie actually cost. So overall, the budget was like 110,000, including all the deferrals and things like that. So everybody made up pretty well from the film. They all got fully paid. It just didn't happen. They got paid a part of it on set, and then the rest of it was a little later down the line once the money rolled in from the movie. But this was when the video market was still strong. Mm-hmm. And, we were in Blockbuster, and Walmart bought X number of copies, 15,000, 20,000 copies. And like, there was serious money to be made with a film that size. That didn't last for long, but it got out there. And then I, because it was being released by Anchor Bay and Lionsgate and stuff, it was competing on the same level. This tiny little movie that I made with like ridiculously low budget for what it was. And was overambitious, and I definitely, in hindsight, like see the flaws in it. But it was competing with stuff that was much, much bigger, and because of that, it was on a critical level with stuff that was much, much bigger, and being reviewed by the same like critics that would be reviewing the studio stuff. And I got trounced critically, badly. Like I'd say like overall it was about 50-50 in terms of who liked it and who didn't, but it was enough people hated it and like outright hated it that I took an ego hit, but it was a necessary one, I think, because it let me step outside my own sort of head and ego for a bit and go, okay, well, I got a lot to learn in a lot of ways, and like in the business side and all of that stuff. So that was coming out. We were doing press for it in 2012. We were at the Fan Expo as a guest of Anchor Bay doing signings and stuff like that. So I had co-written the movie with this guy named Kevin Hutchinson, who was my best friend for a decade and my co-writer for almost as long. We wrote 5 movies. Well, we did story on 5 movies together, and I wrote them. But we, that would be our friendship. Would be doing the standard stuff, hanging out, watching movies, getting food, whatever you do as a friend. And then talking about these ideas, and we built this sort of like shared universe of 5 horror movies, and The Eternal was one of them, and The Collapsed was one of them. I guess The Collapsed would have been the 6th one. Anyway, we made all these sort of movies together. We were very close. So the summer we were doing the press with Anchor Bay, like a week later, he died. And I'm not going to get into any details about that, but it was a sudden and tragic circumstance, and that sent me on a spiral for, of course, almost a year. So I just lived very hard. And the weight gain came out of that, partially because I just didn't give a shit anymore. And I just ate my feelings. And there were substances involved. And I just like, I hit my lowest point for very personal reasons, more so than like the business thing was enough because I had some stuff fall apart and I had enough of the public tell me I sucked and all this sort of thing. But then out of that, I feel like I dragged myself out a little bit. It took time. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of just like dealing with stuff. I mean, I'm not going to get way too personal, but I just eventually I sort of just regrouped. And I started working out again. I started drinking less. I started like getting focused on what I needed to do for the next steps. And I feel like the documentary sort of grew out of that. It was at first I knew I was making it because I wanted to make like a film school in a box kind of thing. But I think part of the reason I turned the camera on myself, aside from the practical, I couldn't afford to follow anyone else. So if I was going to follow a very step-by-step story of someone, the only person I could afford to follow was myself. Like I didn't have budget. The whole doc was paid for out of my own pocket through money I make through I run a post-production and production company. So I do trailers and music video, well, sometimes music videos, but trailers and DCPs and Blu-ray and DVD authoring and stuff. That's how I make most of my money. So I pulled myself out of that as much as I could gradually. And that led to, I guess, the point where we're at now. Where I just gradually I decided that I need to know more about the business that I'm in, and I need to constantly be learning about it, and I need to be a little less ego driven and realize that everybody has a lot to learn. The moment you think you know everything, you are stagnating in your career, and you're completely I'm not really sure which word I want to use here, but you're completely delusional, I think, if you think you don't have more to learn at any point. And just kind of accepting that it's going to be a longer path than I thought it would be when I was a kid. But even then, like the hindsight tells me that, it looks like there were these bigger opportunities growing up and like these bigger movies were getting made. But I don't know if I grew up in that time, if I would have had those opportunities, because I didn't grow up anywhere near the business. And there was a lot of gatekeeping, and now there's still gatekeeping, but it's also democratized a lot more too. And the internet is the reason I have a career. So it's like, who knows, right? That's one of those sliding doors things, right? If I was born 20 years earlier, would I have a career in the business that I grew up dreaming of? I don't know if I would have even gotten to the door to knock on, let alone walk through it. So it's hard to say. Anyway, long story short.
We've got there's so much that you said that I want to expand on without missing anything. But certainly before we move, one of the things that you mentioned, I mean, it was clearly, you got, if I paraphrase, you got yourself out of that dark place, which the reason I mention that is because I think that will resonate with a lot of people who are creative in some way. We all hit that rock bottom. And certainly post-pandemic as well, it's hit people in the industry really hard. So, but you also mention that you got comfortable with letting go of the dream as such, so chasing it, but also being fine with the fact that it may not happen. So that's something I really have difficulty with, and I think a lot of people starting out might just be, it's like, it's got to happen, or this. So how do you keep that fire going and that love to carry on whilst also just going, you know what, I'm fine with that, it not happening?
Well, I think the part of that is the wisdom of age to some degree. I mean, it's not like I'm an ancient, I'm like 39, right? But it's old enough. I think part of that is the wisdom of age and realizing that the dreams you have when you're a kid shouldn't dictate your entire life. And that even though you have a specific dream that you want to get to, I want to make big feature films, or I want to write the great novel, or whatever that happens to be, the path to getting there, it's the Conrad thing, the Hearts of Darkness thing. The journey is more important than the destination. The only way people got to those dreams, the only way people actually made those things happen was they worked for them, or they ended up at the right place at the right time, or, you know, there's a confluence of fate, or whatever it happens to be. It was never a straight line. Most people don't have a straight line to whatever their dream is. And I think if one of the things that really helped me was I stepped back and I went, well, if I don't meet this specific dream, but I still build a track record and I make films that I enjoy and that I get to be on set and I get to make stuff and I'm working constantly and I'm always trying, is that not just living the dream I want anyway? If I'm making films for a living but they're not the exact films I want out of my head because I don't have the resources, is that so bad? That was kind of how I contextualize that a little bit. Is the idea that, you know, as long as I'm making work that I can be proud of ultimately, and realizing that, you know, I'm going to have missteps along the way, that should be enough. I mean, there's definitely creators I grew up, I love, like people like Frank Henlotter, who is a phenomenal director, who's made all these cult classics that people love, and have lived on instead of the test of time. But talking to Frank, it's almost like, you know, that's how the world sees it, but not necessarily how he did in that. In talking to him in his interview, I think that the perception of your work from the outside does not necessarily reflect the perception of your work, but as the person making it, which is interesting, because a lot of people that I grew up wanting to have the careers of didn't realize that they had these legacies until, you know, years and years later when when Blu-ray and DVD and special features and collector's editions came out and they realized what kind of a fan base they have. That didn't happen until 20, 30 years after they made the movie. And I think I'm kind of okay with that idea, as long as I know that I'm working toward being able to at least, I think my dream has just changed. At one, you know, it was very adolescent and very zero focused on a specific goal at one point, and now it's much more about working myself into a position where I'm able to take an idea I have or a script and put it up on screen with there's always going to be compromise, but and notes and all that sort of thing, but at least get the vision up in my head on the screen in a way that is as close as possible given the realities of the business. That's enough of a dream for me, and if that means I'm doing it at lower budgets, fine, I'm okay with that. I think it's really just the wisdom of age going, you know, life is more than your job, life is more than your dreams, and life is more than your career, and whatever else. Like, there's so much else to it. It's important to kind of take stock of that and realize that, hey, like, even though I didn't make the adolescent thing yet, I'm at least I have a body of work. Like, I have a shelf of my own movies right next to a lot of the people I grew up with, you know, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And that's nothing to complain about.
No, absolutely. Especially as it's said in the film industry as well, that a lot of people, once they get to the stage of making one feature, they don't make any others. And I think that's certainly, whilst that's not said in directly in Clapboard Jungle, there's certainly that reference to, well, hang on, we're looking for people that we won't just do one movie with, we want to do more. So, you know, given that so many people seem to drop off after one feature, how do you find your partnership where you can, or what advice would you give to someone as to, because it's more than chemistry, I think, as to finding that partnership where you can grow rather than be ripped off? And I said we're going to go back to the red flags and people to avoid, but that seems really came across as an important feature, that you look for those long relationships.
Yeah, I mean, it is a relationship business, and I think one of the lessons film schools teach a lot is you got to be networking. You've got to always be networking. Get out there to parties and network and meet people. And on a very base level, there's that is important. But I think a lot of people take the wrong lesson from networking, because they think of it as, I'm going to go to a party with these business cards and I'm going to cynically meet people. I'm going to make sure that every conversation I have, I'm going to drive that conversation to my own work. And then eventually someone's going to say, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to make that for you. And I don't think that's even remotely how this business works. I think that's a very, very cynical and a very, it's created a lot of people who are not in the business of building a good working relationship with people, but are in a business of just sort of going out there with two faces, right? Mm-hmm. The happy, hi, how you doing? I'm such and such. But behind it is, okay, what can I do to manipulate this person into making my movie? Which those people generally don't last long in the business. Mm-hmm. I've noticed, and I am guilty of that mentality in my younger years as well, because that is just kind of ingrained into you. It's like, well, how do you get a movie made? You got to talk to as many people as possible. How do you talk to as many people as possible? Well, you've got to network and go to parties, but you should also just send your material out to all the IMDb Pro in the early 2000s gave you access, and it still does, gives you access to direct contact info for tons and tons of companies. So you send out your material and you're like, hey, look at this. And now that I'm on the other side of it, and I'm actually getting material sent to me all the time, because I work for distribution companies and I'm a festival programmer and stuff like that, and I'm getting scripts all the time, you realize how empty that is, and how you really can't start a relationship that way, because it's immediately one-sided from the first point. It's either you do something for me or I'm going to just ignore you, or the other way around. It's like, okay, well, how... Nobody wants to take a cold email and go, okay, for legal reasons, first of all, you can't do that. You can't take someone's cold sent script, read it, and go, okay, I don't want to do this. Then 5 years down the line, they try and sue you because one line in something that you've made is somewhat similar to something they've made, and they know you've read the script, so they try and... Anyway, there's a lot of legal liability reasons why you can't read unsolicited material. But beyond that, it's just the coldness of it, because you know that person has likely sent that to 100 other people, this exact same form email kind of thing, right? So, yeah, I think it's important that you realize that the business is very much more about finding your tribe. I don't want to use tribal language. More about finding your circle. The people that are going to see, not necessarily eye to eye with your vision, but see the potential in each other, because it goes both ways, or it goes group wide. Like, it's not just about getting your career ready. It's about how can you help them, not just on a business level, but also like to bounce ideas off of, to just chill out and relax and have a conversation with. Like, it can't just be about the films. It has to also be your see eye to eye as people. You get along in a way that means when the inevitable arguments and disagreements and creative differences pop up, because they will, you have a good way to discuss those, because you look at each other as people. You're not looking at each other as like, this is the person financing me, or this is the this is my producer, and that's all. Like, fuck off unless we're talking about the movie. That kind of relationship doesn't work. So I think it's really important to realize that there's great people in the business. There's tons of them, and some of the bigger people, they're great, but they're not going to have really the time for you, because they got their own stuff going on, unless you end up in a situation where you actually get to know them as a human being. In one way, shape, or another, because then you become more of a priority. And it's an organic thing. You can't just, you can't have a parasocial relationship with somebody for years, and then then in the hope that they're going to be, this tight person who is going to make your career happen. You can't just because you believe this is the person, you can't just like zero focus on them and hope that they're going to make something happen. Like, my current co-producer that I work with the most is Avi Federgreen. He's a really great guy and has produced 70 feature films in Canada, distributed another 150 or so. Like, he's been doing this a long time. And the first time I met Avi was after a TIFF premiere of a movie he produced called Leslie, My Name is Evil, which I think is called Manson, My Name is... It's a Charles Manson movie. Anyway, it was after the premiere, and a friend of mine was like, you got to meet Avi Federgreen. And I distinctly remember this, and Avi doesn't remember this, and this is funny. I walked up to him at the end of the thing. I'm like, hi, I'm Justin. I'm a filmmaker. I made this. And he's like, oh, cool. And he walked away. And then it wasn't, this was like 2008, I think. And then 4 years later, we were both at the same Anchor Bay party at Fan Expo. this literally the same summer, the same week that Kevin died. And I was having a drink at the bar, and he walked up and ordered a drink, and we just started chatting. And that's where that built out of. Was just like I didn't even think we were talking about film necessarily. We just talked, and that relationship. Eventually, he found out. Oh, I run a post-production company, and I do X and X and X, so I can help his business. And I've got these projects I need to get done. So he came on board as a producer on The Eternal, and it kind of just grew from there. But it was very much just an organic conversation of two people at a bar having a drink that started that. It didn't start from I've got a film or I'm a filmmaker. It was very much a friendship first. And I think that's like for your long-term collaborators, that's your best case scenario. Because and you could have falling like friends do. You can have falling outs over time, and there are people that may help you early on that may not last your entire career. And is a time when you need to move on, but it's important. I think it's important to realize it's not a networking business; it's a relationship business. And at the very least, that's one of the big lessons that have come out of the last decade for me. I don't know how else I can phrase that. I hope I covered your question, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly, my comment, and coming from a business and legal background as well, my first sort of networking at festivals is I would talk. Generally, if I've really enjoyed something, I'll go over with no ulterior motive and have a chat. And the amount of people that will push with a business card going, I've got a script, I've got this. And it's really rude.
It turns people right off.
It is. Right. And I found very naturally the conversation sort of turns to, what do you want to do? And I've met people that who've supported me with their advice, but not necessarily wanted to work with me. And I found people that want to work with me and are ready to go for when I film my short. So, it's what you're saying is a reflection of the experience, especially as the horror genre is really very friendly. I found even some of the biggest names always have time for you. It's lovely. So I think it's right that you highlight both now and in the documentary that you should focus on building the relationship, because you never know where that will lead.
Well, it's a long game. Exactly. It's a long game.
Yeah.
You don't know the conversation that you had 5 years ago may influence something that happens for you 5 years later. You don't know that. So you can't think of every conversation as a role-playing game where it's like, oh, or maybe that's the way to think of it is, oh, I've just gotten a little experience boost, as opposed to, oh, I've reached the goal or beat the boss or whatever. It's not, I don't know. I'm using a bad video game analogy, but it kind of works. You're character building. You're not necessarily going for the boss fight right away.
Well, yeah. And there's got to be that genuineness and genuine interest, not just, oh, I'm going to make friends so I can exploit them later as well. Now going on to, we've talked about how sort of lovely and open people are, and that's quite evident from the number of people that you interviewed. But also you highlighted that there was a production agent that had effectively really taken you for a ride. That's not the first time I've heard of that. So with going into as much detail as you can, I realize there may all be legal reasons. What happened and what red flags should a new filmmaker look for to avoid the same happening?
Well, I'd like to start by saying I was an idiot, first of all, because I should have seen the red flags. But I'll go into the detail. If you want to know the person's name, I actually wrote a blog about this where I named them years ago. You can find it on my old Tumblr. So as specific as I'm going to be, if you want to find out, my company name is Unstable Ground, and I have a Tumblr. Somewhere in the recesses of my history, there is a blog I wrote, a long one, where he's named. And the reason I was comfortable naming him is because this particular person is a career con man. And at the time he still is, he's wanted for arrest in both US and Canada by the actual police. And at the time it was because he defrauded an entire old folks home north of the city where I live in Canada. A lot of old people lost their money to him too. Okay, so I had just finished Working Class Rockstar, which is the first documentary I'd ever done. I finished shooting that in 2006. I had the first cut of it ready in 2007. So I was looking for a way to sell it, and I had no clue what I was doing. So I was meeting with producers reps, and I think I got them out of Craigslist. I think I made a Craigslist post saying, I'm looking for someone to sell this movie. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I specifically phrased it that way, but basically, hey, I'm looking for someone to sell this movie. I remember having interviews with a few people, and the one person I probably should have gone with, I heard a lot of bad things about from friends, which is weird, because down the line they ended up being, pretty damn trustworthy. But people talk. The business is like high school, and there's a lot of gossip, and I think that gossip's a lot of it. But perspective though too. It's like every bad story you can hear about someone. Sometimes they're real. Sometimes it's like. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. So anyway, I ended up having a meeting with this guy who talked a really good game. And in the initial meeting, made a lot of really big promises. And he was about to go to the American film market. No, he was about to go to the European film market in Berlin very shortly, and said he would take the film and shop it around for me. And as we were having this conversation, he would show me photos of one second. Okay. Photos of himself at his phone. With like Anna Faris and other celebrities, and he's like, see, look, and it's like, oh, this guy must be legit or whatever. And also at the time he told me he's got cancer, so his goal, he's fighting it, but if he's taken out, it was a big sob story. If he's taken out of the world, at least he'll have helped younger filmmakers get going, and it was a great pitch. So I signed on with him, but the red flags initially that I should have known about, and now I bluntly tell people, yeah, run. Is he wanted a $5,000 retainer up front, which is producers reps don't ask for those, and if they do, they're out to con you. That was the first sort of thing. So he asked for a $5,000 retainer up front, which I paid, and then he went to EFM with it. And when he went to the European film market, I'd get these texts throughout the market like, oh, Israel's offered $10,000, such and such is offered, and it added up to like, for this movie that cost maybe $30,000 over a 3-year period, less than that at this point. It added up to like $150,000. It was no small amount of money. And I was like, holy shit. I was so excited. Because, and so basically he racked up what he said was $150,000 worth of sales, which was great. But then time would pass and I'd be like, so where are the contracts? Do I need to sign anything? How do I need to deliver the film to anyone? And it was just silence. And then he came back and said, yeah, we're going to be able to move forward, but before you sign anything, you're going to need errors and omissions insurance, which to me was I had no idea about E&O, which is essential. If you're going to distribute a film, you do need E&O insurance. I just didn't know it existed at the time. So he said, I'll arrange it, because I didn't know it existed. He said, I'll arrange it for you. It's going to cost $5,500. Just, give me the money and I'll arrange insurance, and we should also hire a publicist. That's going to be $3,000. So all in all, I was into him for about $14,000.
Was there any written contracts
None.
involved?
Well, between this guy, yes. Yeah. This guy I had written contracts with at the time. Again, I was very green and I was very much an idiot. So
but at least you didn't forget that. Definitely, yeah. That's something that's come out of other people.
It was all contracted. I had signed deals with him. He was using his real name, all of that sort of thing. And he had a track record. Like he's one of the producers on Pontypool. I always make a joke that I indirectly financed Pontypool or helped finance Pontypool. He had produced a documentary series from previously. So anyway, I gave him this money, and then it was more radio silence, and that sort of thing. And so I started digging. And it turned out that the address that was on his contracts was to a gym that did not have his offices in it at all. It was just a gym. And I started doing due diligence and asking previous contacts about him. And it turned out he's just defrauded everybody. And he took other people on this documentary series that he worked on. He took way more money, hundreds of thousands of dollars from people compared to the relatively small amount that he took from me comparatively. And I just started trying to track him down over a period of time. And it bared very little fruit. Like he traveled a lot. And I think what it is he defrauds people, or I don't know if he's still doing this, but he would defraud people, and then he would travel to markets around the world, and then he would just stay in those countries until heat had died down, and then go to the next country, and then go to the next country. I did see him again at my first year at AFM in 2009. I ran into him at a party, and it was like the most uncomfortable thing possible. I had to hold back everything I possibly could to just get very angry and make a scene at the party. But very quickly after I ran into him, he quit the sales company he was working for at that AFM, and he's kind of been in the wind ever since. And like do you remember a Star Trek documentary called Free Enterprise? I don't even know if it was a documentary or a mockumentary. Do you remember a film called Free Enterprise from like the mid-2000s?
I think so. A lot's happened since then, but I think so.
Yeah, there was a sequel to that being planned that he was also a producer on, and he took all their money too. So I kept track of him over the years, and like he just kept. He's the Carmen Sandiego of con men producers reps basically. But anyway, long story short is I learned a lot from that. I consider that 14,000 to be like my crash course in your face film school of, hey, get serious about this, and start doing more due diligence and start checking people out, and start learning legal. And I do have 2 entertainment lawyers I use, but I'm very good at reading contracts now, so I only use them if I absolutely have to.
There was some really good advice in the documentary about, yes, you need to know your accounting skills as an indie, you need your legal skills, and it definitely, I would agree there, it's having that business head as well as being a creative. So, and I think, personally, that's where Clapboard Jungle offers something a little bit different from, well, it offers it offers a lot more than, say, some of the books and everything that I've read, which I have to say seem to be a lot of an ego trip, as in, and I know you wanted to avoid a vanity project, which you did. There was a lot to learn, but when you talked about the business aspects, it was really, that was an aspect I don't think has come across strongly in other sort of
I would
advice
say there are 2 books that filmmakers should absolutely read, though, on this topic. One of them is called The Writer Got Screwed But Didn't Have to, which is a hell of a book. It's a little dated because it was written in the late 90s or early 2000s, and the contracts are way different now, and the amounts they talk about in the book for what a film sells for are like significantly different now. They're way lower. But the book itself is really, really good for working out legalese and making sure that you don't sign a bad contract. The other one's called Think Outside the Box Office by John Reese, who's interviewed in the doc. For any independent filmmaker trying to figure out how to make their way in the business, those 2 books, definitely read them. If you don't, you're missing a significant amount of information.
Well, great. Great advice there and recommendations. Certainly going back to that green individual, because let's face it, whatever age you are, if you're starting out and you've not made a film before, there's going to be that balance. I tend to find people fall into 2 categories. Sometimes both. Is either they're really, really confident and they don't want to hear any criticism, or even if it's constructive, and it's like, this is going to be great, or they second guess every single detail to the extent they cripple themselves. So how would you, and said, some people probably swing between the 2. So for the aspiring filmmaker, I've been told the best way is to just admit your fault, admit that you don't know much and that you're growing, and to surround yourself with a great team who can support you. How did you go about that? And would you agree with that advice?
I would. I think one of the worst things you can be in the film business at this point, if you want to ruin your career early, is a film student with a chip on your shoulder who thinks they know everything and starts the business by tearing down other people's work. It's a huge mistake to start your career by being a douchebag. But it
happens though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
we all hear of those aspiring directors who are absolute nightmares on set.
I'm in so many filmmaking Facebook groups. I don't comment a lot, but I'm in them, and it boggles my mind how many people come from the business from a negative perspective of like, these movies are terrible and this is why mine will be better. And it's like, it's part of the reason I'm not like I don't have a letterboxd. I don't have a YouTube channel criticizing films. I don't write negative reviews of anything on my social media, because partially because I would rather prop up things I like, but also because as somebody in the business, that stuff can come back and bite you in the ass pretty hard. So like if you've got a letterbox and you tear apart somebody's movie and one of those producers is looking at you for a job or maybe wants to make your movie, and then they look at the letterbox review where you've torn apart their movie, how's that going to help you? Like
I'm kind of stuffed then. Although to be fair, I'm always constructive with my.
Well, I think it's different if your career is press and you're a journalist. Like one of my co-writer on a couple projects and one of my good friends, Serena Whitney, was a critic for Dread Central for years and years and years, and has broken out of that. But like, I don't think any of her past stuff necessarily is going to come back to bite her, because if you're a journalist, it's one thing. As long as you're not doing both at the exact same time. I think the problem that you run into is the people that are actively tearing apart stuff, but also actively trying to make movies, and those two don't mesh. I don't think those mesh at all. But I'm sure there are people that make it work, but I haven't seen it yet.
It's interesting because I've seen filmmakers in those groups who are. There is this kind of, it's critical filmmaker, and you're not the both. Albeit, my career has developed the way it's developed. I enjoy talking about films, and you know what, that's fine. But yeah, at the same time, you can't blow smoke up people's asses for the sake of it.
You've got to be honest and not harsh and mean.
But you can't. There's too many critics who, to be fair, just slate things. And really, every film has its audience. But it's interesting how many filmmakers will say, I don't think critics should even criticize, say what they say unless they've got experience in the film industry. And there are polar opposites, but I digress. Anyway, so talking.
Well, as much as you hate a film, I tell you that filmmaker hates themselves more.
I can appreciate that, definitely. Being creative, because I think sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and you'll be sat in an audience. I mean, I've looked after people at film festivals who've been the packed cinemas. Everyone's wanted to see the films. They've loved them, but they've been shaking on the way in because they're expecting everyone to walk out or something like that. So.
I've stood in the lobby before while my movie's played, and I've had friends who do the same thing, where it's like, I don't want to be in there right now. Part of that is just festival fatigue, where it's like, I've now sat in multiple screenings and I don't want to sit in another one. But part of it is like, I'm going to sit this one out. It's just because you get the vibe from the audience or whatever it happens to be. I don't know. It's definitely, it's nerve-wracking putting any work in the public eye, because technically, if you put your heart and soul into something, it's almost like birthing. It's not exactly like birthing a child, but to an extent, you're birthing an art baby, and you don't want somebody to pick up your art baby and then smash it into the pavement. So it's very nerve-wracking when that first unveiling to the public.
And I think, certainly the analogy was drawn in Clapboard Jungle, and it's something I've said myself, that very much, it is like the baby. There is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into the creative process, whichever that is, and then you put that out there, and it develops a life of its own, and often beyond its creator as well. Now, certainly when talking of criticism and critics, it seems like everyone is a blogger and critic nowadays, and the internet. But even then, even within sort of the journalists, I mean, I've personally found, as I've developed my career along the film journalism route, that there's a lot of people who I would have previously trusted as someone looking for good film, and when you read the reviews, it's really quite obvious that they've not really read it. So I would say to any newbie about being, or in fact any filmmaker, about being wary about, it's that balance between you can't take criticism personally, but also there's an element that should listen. How do you personally know who to listen to? I don't think I have a solid answer for that. I mean, as much as cheaper technology has democratized the film business and more people are making films because they can pick up like a cell phone camera and make a movie,
that went very viral a few weeks or maybe a month and a half ago. People talking about how you can't. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that argument because that gets into an argument about privilege and opportunity and all that sort of thing, and it's just a topic that maybe we can get into later. But I don't have a solid answer for that. I have to just go with my gut, and I try to read every review and every piece of criticism as objectively as possible and take what I can out of them. But sometimes you've seen a weird agenda, or like somebody who doesn't seem like they actually watched the film necessarily, or just watched it over their phone and like checked in every 5 minutes and then wrote a review out of it. I've definitely, that kind of stuff I tend to ignore. If it seems very clearly that they just weren't paying attention, I tend to ignore that review. But for the most part, I try to take stuff from all reviews, good or bad, and try not to get too inflated if most of the reviews are positive, because there's always something to take from the negative ones as well, provided they're written from a perspective of decent analysis. And it's not up to me to judge what is good analysis and what isn't, but people do have a tendency, because there's so much now, because everybody's got a blog, because everybody's got a YouTube channel, because everybody's got a Letterboxd and IMDb and stuff, and like anyone can say whatever the heck they want to. There is a tendency for certain people to realize that negative opinions draw more clicks, and the more vicious they are in that negative opinion, the more clicks they're going to get, especially if it's the opposite opinion to the majority, because then you get hate clicks. And I always try to figure out, if somebody's saying something in a negative way or a positive way, what is the motivation behind that? Is it a genuine interpretation of the material, or is there a specific reason they're saying this? And not just for my stuff, for anything I read. It's like, you really, the same as when you're reading the news, you need to have a certain degree of journalistic IQ, of understanding sort of what makes a reliable story and what makes, just a hit piece, or, like especially the last year, the amount, now that it's becoming more and more popular to share scientific preprints and studies before they've been peer reviewed, and like conclusions and thesis that people come up with about this particular virus we're living with, before they've had a chance to be reviewed by anyone else, and those end up as massive news stories that maybe a week later are disproved, but everybody believes now. I think it's important to have a degree of the ability to journalistically assess any piece of writing or media and understand if it's coming from a altruistic or properly informed place, or if it's just there to stir the pot, I guess. Mm-hmm. But determining what those are is increasingly more difficult. So really, it's just, I got to go with my gut. I have to feel that the note makes sense, and then I'll take the note. Otherwise, life is too short to try and bow to everybody's negative opinion and try and please everybody. Because when you do that, you please nobody. I firmly believe that if you're beholden to what other people want from you, you're not really making work for yourself anymore, or for your own satisfaction in life. And as much as the audience is important, I think the one audience that has to live with the work that I do until the moment I'm dead and in the ground is me. In 50 years, if I'm still alive in 50 years, if I look back on the work I've done, and I think, and most of my career is just me going, oh, I made that one because somebody said this, and I made that one because somebody said this, I'm not going to be very happy with myself. I think I just need to go with my gut and take the lessons I need to take, and everything else can kind of just fall into the noise. There's also the advice, never read your own reviews, which is really hard to do. Like, to just not read anything, it's incredibly difficult to just turn that completely off. Maybe when I get older, I'm going to be in a position where I'm like, you know what, I don't care anymore, but I do want to read what people have to say, because it allows me to have informed decisions about my life and my path moving forward. Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse.
that intuition, it comes with experience. This is the case in any industry. The films that you make at the start are going to be a much lower quality, even if they're great, than the films in 10 years time. At least you'd hope that's the case. So yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. I mean, certainly one thing that really surprised me when you were talking, because I had this sort of vision of, you know, you get your idea, your script together, you find a production company, or even if it's through various contacts that may be interested in it. But then you were referring to, you know, having a number of things on the slate that effectively you, when you were making sort of applications, you talked about a number of projects, and that was something that came as a surprise to me. So, you know, can we delve into that a little bit more as to what is best? Are you best having, say, a number of projects, and is there a magic number, or should you focus on one or two when approaching potential producers?
I think if there was only one strategy that worked, everybody would be doing it. So I don't necessarily have a specific guideline, but in my experience, it's much better to think of it as a shotgun approach, in that when you're having a meeting with somebody and pitching material, they may not be interested in your one idea, but they may have money and they may want to produce something, and they may like your past work and they may want to work with you. But if they don't like your one idea, then the conversation's over. Mm-hmm. But if you've got a slate of ideas, if you've got a slate of projects in various stages of development, then you can point to other ideas by asking, well, what are you looking for? What kind of film do you want to make? Because it's far more often in a meeting or you know, in an email chain or whatever, where somebody will say, well, we've got this and we're looking to do a heightened supernatural thriller in a single house location. And you go, okay, I have this project that would work. Mm-hmm. As opposed to you going, oh, I don't have that. Shit, there goes that opportunity. It definitely helps to have more than one project, not just for that eventuality where you're in a meeting and somebody doesn't like the one you want to make, but they have a desire to make something in a vein of something else you've got at a given time, because there's always projects that are priority projects in a meeting that you're trying to get done first. Like for us, that's Mark of Cain and Do You See What I See, which are the two that are sort of covered in the feature. Those are our priority projects right now. But I'm not going to lose the opportunity to make one of the other projects on the slate if the right opportunity comes up. So I think for me, it's about having a catalog of stuff, a slate of stuff that if the opportunity arises, I'm able to meet that opportunity. I think Paul Schrader said in the movie that success is preparation plus luck. And without the preparation, you can't take advantage of the luck. So it's almost like the more diversified you are, the more value you have. And that works as well in terms of working with longer term partners. Because if they like your project, they're going to want to know, well, what else do you have? And if you've got nothing, well, that conversation's pretty short. So I think for me, it makes sense to have a diversified portfolio of projects, and also to be open to other projects. Like if somebody comes to me with a script and money, I'm going to consider it at least. But ultimately, that's really what it is just to be able to meet the possibilities that arise by having prepared material when those possibilities arise. That's really what it is. That being said, I don't think I have a contained low-budget supernatural thriller like that. Even though those are very popular, people like to make ghost movies because they make money. I don't have one that's original enough for me to want to make it.
Fair enough. Now, we explore a number of the potential projects in Clapboard Jungle. Is there a point where you say, you know what, this is really not working, I am going to just abandon this, take it off the slate? Or do you always leave a good concept on the slate and just wait for its time?
I haven't taken anything off my slate at this point. So they're still in the book. They just stopped being, I don't know why my throat's so scratchy right now. Hoping it's not the big one.
To be fair, I am making you talk a lot.
That is part of
it. It happens. I'm sorry. I should have warned you.
Dip the volume every time I go. I haven't taken anything off my own personal slate, so I can't speak for myself. They just become less priority projects, so they're not the ones I lead a meeting with. They're just there for people to, maybe it catches their eye. But if it's something is publicly announced, that's when like The Eternal is a good example of one that we went to press with. We even announced cast attachments. Michael Biehn was attached, and James Morans, and then there were ones we didn't announce, like Padme Asano and Keith David and stuff like that. But because that project wasn't up in the public eye, I actually had to make a public statement saying, we're shelving this for now. It's not, it's been too long. It's still on our slate, but we're not actively pursuing development anymore, and we're focusing on these. I had to, because with that project in particular, we made like a proof of concept trailer that ended up getting over 1 million views on YouTube.
It looked great. I saw it. I still think there's a market for it, but
sure there is, but it's just getting the money together. It's a bigger project than a lot of the stuff I'm trying to raise money on. Well, no, Mark O'Kane is bigger than it, but in terms of the other stuff I'm trying to raise money for right now, it's got a significant budget behind it. It's a pretty big action horror movie, so it's hard to put together. But maybe the time is right to revisit it. Anyway, long story short, I had that, and then there was like 500,000 views of the short film on YouTube as well. And I figured enough people knew about it that I had to at least publicly say something, and so I wasn't getting questions like when's it coming. But yeah, I haven't removed anything from my slate at all, because I still believe in all those ideas. I still believe in all those scripts. I just make them less of a priority, and I prioritize the ones I believe I can get to camera sooner. Is kind of the way I have to operate. For other people, it might work differently. They might just be like, I'm done. I'm giving up on this one. But it's up to your gut. Again, you just kind of have to decide what you like. Is it enough of a millstone to not get a project made for many years that you want it completely out of your life? Then remove it from your life.
Okay. Now, certainly going on to, there was a great quote from Del Toro about certainly the changing aspects, where he says now it's all about streaming and content, and he likens content and to like waste, which anyone on social media can relate to. But certainly now, there is, as someone says, that there's a tsunami of content. We can spend hours going through Netflix or any other streaming service and just getting overwhelmed. So ultimately, and of course, personally, I think there's going to be, well, there is now post-pandemic, more of a move to straight to streaming. Rather than going to the theatre. So I think that the sentiments that were expressed in Clapboard Jungle about people now going for streaming rather than deliberate to the movies, I think is the future. So how do you think that's going to impact on the budget and the amount of money to be made? Because as it said, there's going to be let me know what you think, but that seems to me that if we're viewing films as content, then they have a much shorter shelf life than in previous years. So how can new filmmakers or indie filmmakers adapt to this changing environment, which also involves significantly less money than years ago?
I think that's anybody's guess at this point. The streaming services are still paying money. Like they're the ones that are actually actively making content and producing it themselves are still putting millions of dollars into these films, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars into these movies, depending on what they are. There's always going to be that bigger film side of things, and I think that the streaming platforms actually do make enough revenue to be able to support that. Of course, Netflix is into their investors for billions of dollars right now. Like Netflix is not a money-making business yet, still, technically. But they're still throwing multi-millions of dollars at projects because they need the content to keep their subscribers coming, because they need the highest subscriber base to make back the money to pay the investors and actually become solvent in like a proper, highly valued business. So entirely, entirely, there's still going to be those big films and those opportunities to make those big films and series. There's going to be lots of digital series and limited series, and all that stuff is going to continue to get made. So there's opportunity there to get involved with that sort of thing. On the independent side of things, I think the middle's gone. And it's been gone for a while, but it's really gone now. And the movies between like 2 million and 10 million there's some that'll get made. They're going to be very few and far between. And I think even the movies more than $1 million are going to be harder to make for an indie. So that puts you at a whole bunch of movies being made for less than $1 million. And I would say that the lion's share of the indie movies will be made for less than $500,000. So you're going to see a lot more really low budget indie stuff being made, probably even lower than that. You're already seeing it. Especially stuff that's been generated by the independents themselves. Mm-hmm. It's going to be just a big, vast difference. So I think the issue we're going to run into is that the bigger stuff, there's going to be a lot of it because the streaming platforms need a lot of it to keep it going. So people are going to get used to the actual experience with large budgets and big, bombastic, blockbuster storytelling at home through streaming. Mm-hmm. What that's going to lead to is, I think, less acceptance of the lower budget stuff on streaming and on VOD and stuff like that. And it's already happening, but it's going to get worse. So if it's normalized that for your $8 a month or your $10 a month, you're going to get what you would normally get if you went to a movie theater and paid, $15 for one sitting for one movie. If that gets normalized where you're expecting massive quality, I think you're going to have a divide. The people who like independent film and independent cinema are going to be this niche group, and it's going to help keep that alive. Mm-hmm. But it's going to mean more films don't make their money back. So maybe that means less films get made gradually over time. But I don't know that for sure because there's still such a passion for making movies, and anybody with a cell phone can make something. And you can put it up on a platform or put it up on VOD with, not a lot of money. You can at least get it out there. You won't see a return on it for the most part. So I think if it's normalized that blockbusters are at home, that's going to make it just harder and harder for independent filmmakers to convince people to watch their material. Because if the choice is between WandaVision and My Film Life Changer, most people are going to pick WandaVision. I mean, if it's the same hours, it's the same people, it's the same time in your life to choose, right? Well, if there's a new Marvel streaming series every 3 weeks, or if there's a new Star Wars series every 3 weeks, the majority of the audience is going to go to that stuff. So I do think it guts the indie scene a little bit, but I don't know for sure because we're in a period right now where the old guard is trying to figure out what to do to hold on to the old ways, and I'm not talking about the Netflix movie. I mean, like the people who control have controlled the business for the last 50 years, basically, are still trying to hold on to the way it was and the way films were sold and the way that revenue came in. Mm-hmm. And now we're in a position where there's going to be a whole new paradigm for how stuff gets made and distributed. But I don't think we're at the point yet where we understand what that is exactly. So, you've got stuff like NFTs right now. People are monetizing art through blockchain, and it's incredibly complicated and it's incredibly damaging to climate change. But that is a new way people are figuring out how to monetize art. Of course, I'm not going to get into that conversation because there's a lot of negative. There's a negative aspect to that as well. But new ideas will come forward on how to monetize independent film and get it out to people. And there's already specialty streaming platforms that cater to that niche. You've got your Arrow player, which obviously Clapboard Jungle is coming to. You've got your Shutters, you've got your Midnight Pulps, mm-hmm. and Tubi, and all these platforms that kind of cater to a more niche. And that goes all the way to, especially Blu-ray labels like Vinegar Syndrome or 88 Films or whoever else. In that they've found a way to keep money flowing for their particular companies, and to an extent, the filmmakers that are being released through those companies by packaging a specific experience to a specific niche. And I think it'll be like record collecting or whatever else. It'll be very much. There's always going to be appeal for independent film. There's always going to be an audience for it, and especially the ones that break out will break into a larger public consciousness. But for the majority of films that get made on an independent level, you're just catering to a smaller audience now, I think. You're definitely not getting your theatrical runs. You might potentially get, something small or limited, but that's not going to be what drives your audience. It's really going to be about that conversation on whatever platform you're on. And the only way to make the shelf life of that grow is by sort of growing the personality around that film, the people who made it, what they've got coming next, engaging with the public and building, like a band would go on a tour, and then people who like the band follow that band on tour and buy their merch and stuff like that. And I feel like independent filmmaking is going to kind of turn into something similar to that, in that,
yeah, we need our brand. Certainly, I know there was a commentary about social media, and certainly one thing I saw at the film festival when I met the Soskers, who were also from Canada, was whatever you think of them, there was a brand, a very powerful brand that I'd not seen in many indie filmmakers. So there's a lot to be learned from the business aspect of how to be an influencer, so people want to see your things.
Definitely. There's definitely an influencer side to it for sure.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I thought when it was expressed at the beginning, I think there was a quote where you say, it's the best that get made. And I'm going to respectfully disagree there, because certainly even when at Fantasia,
what was that in the context of?
It was right at the beginning where it was a case of where you're saying, oh, it's the best film, the best get to made.
Well, no, I think that was, okay.
Or is that how you started? Because I know that, or certainly that was, I think that was true originally, or certainly there's a perception that that's the truth, that it's the very best that get made. But certainly within horror, there's a lot of criticism about the fact the quality has really fallen alongside the amount of money that there is to invest. So for now, what do you feel are the three, or if you were to summarize, no more than three key elements that really you think leads to your projects making it to silver screen, or now to the TV?
So in terms of the best getting made, I think what I meant there was not necessarily the best films on a story level get made. It's that for every one that gets made, there's probably 100 or 1,000 that are even worse, is probably what that meant. But because no matter what, if your movie gets made, you convince somebody to put money into it, and that somebody thought it was good enough to get it made. And there's probably 50 other people that person's looked at who they thought wasn't good enough. So based on that person's opinion, that got made. But yes, it's definitely true. There's a lot of bad genre film and a lot of bad film out there, and that just happens. What do you think separates the ones that get made to the ones that don't, when we know it's not just about the storyline as such? I think a big part of it is the personality and the track record of the filmmakers. Like, if they have a track record of any kind, that helps get your project done more so than a first timer. But if they're a first timer and they talk a really good game and they have a good presentation and they're able to convince the financer or the producer or whoever it is that their vision will come across as a good film, like if they're good in a room in the pitch, then that helps. That's certainly something that gets the film in a better position than if those elements weren't at the table. Like, preparation is important, and understanding how to sell to a person, how to make your idea an appealing one to them. And part of that is knowing what that person really wants out of producing movies. If they're just looking to make money, that's the pitch. It's not necessarily about the movie anymore. It's about, it really depends. But ultimately, that's one big part of it, is that the personality of the person or the track record of the person, or a combination of that, has a lot to do with getting a movie made. The other side of it is just having a hook that the financier or the distributor or whoever is putting money into it or partnering on it knows that they can sell in a concise way. So if you can boil your idea down. Well, a great example is Cocaine Bear, right? That right in the title, you know what that movie is. You know people are going to want to watch it, because who the fuck doesn't want to watch a movie about a cocaine bear? And you know that people will be talking about this in the press and on social media because it's such an easy hook. It's like a bear ingests a bunch of cocaine and fucks with people. Okay, done. You know, the movies with the easiest hook generally have a tendency to get made. Why is Sharknado so popular? Well, it's about sharks in a tornado that attack a city because there's sharks in the tornado.
It's ridiculous that you have to see it, even though you know it's going to be a car crash. But yeah.
Oh, exactly. That's Sharknado to be good, but they want to watch it because I get to watch a movie about sharks in a tornado. I mean, like they want to. There's a lot of appeal to the have a beer with friends and watch a stupid movie aspect of the business. So if you've got a concept that is easily explained, like when I was shopping Life Changer, I said it was American Psycho through the perspective of the creature of the thing. That helped a bit, but it's not really what the movie's about. And when you watch the actual movie, it's a lot more complicated than that. So if I actually told what it was really, it would take me a paragraph to explain that movie entirely, or more. Like I'd have to write a whole page. So the people who are able to boil their concept down in a way that the people you're pitching to identify that concept immediately and understand how to market it immediately and realize that there is an audience for it immediately, those movies get made much more often than Sky Sharks is another good example, you know, based on posters and a concept of, you know, Nazis riding sharks that in the sky. Those guys pre-sold to Sony and a bunch of other companies with very, you know, they had like a teaser reel. But you know, if you can concisely sell something, then it will sell much easier than something you can't explain clearly. I have a friend who's a hell of a writer. I'm not going to name him. He's a hell of a writer. He writes incredibly great stuff. I can't explain his concepts easily. And I think that's part of the reason why his stuff doesn't get made or hasn't been made yet. But that, like, they're amazing scripts. I just have no fucking idea. I wouldn't know how to be like, how do you sell this? Like, what is, and I think that's where the track record comes in, because you can make a movie like that on film 2 or film 3 because they trust you to pull off something. Mm-hmm. But on film 1, it's tough because if you can't wrap your head around what the movie's even about, and it's a first-time filmmaker, a little bit more difficult. And I think the other one is just timing and luck, you know, and relationships. Like you're working with people who already trust you in some way, shape, or form, and who have the money to be able to spend, and who got the idea and the pitch at the right time for them to go, okay, yeah, this works for us right now. Let's do it. So part of it's preparation, part of it's just being good in a room, and part of it is having a hook that you can sell. I think that stuff raises to the top, and that's also why a lot of bad movies get made, is because, you know, if you're basing your assessment of an entire story on one sentence, maybe you're missing the bigger picture. But that one sentence is what's going on the poster, that's one, you know, going on the IMDb description, and the trailer is all going to be based around that one sentence. So, well, you know, what are you going to do?
Exactly. Now, you did touch on the experience of women in the film industry, and certainly, you know, there was opinions expressed that, you know, there's an extra level of an extra barrier to overcome. What advice specifically would you have for a woman breaking into the industry at any level?
You're actually in a better place now than you were, say, 5 years ago. In fact, it's flipped enough now that if you're BIPOC or a woman trying to get this done, your chances are getting better and better. I'm not saying that you don't have the same systemic issues to deal with, because you definitely do. And I can't speak to it as in first person experience because I am not one, so that's not really it's not my life experience. I don't know exactly. I do have a female BIPOC writing partner right now, Serena, and I wouldn't be able to tell you on her own independent stuff what she's been dealing with specifically, because I'm not in that part of her life. But I will say that anecdotally and also in meetings I've had, a lot of writers and directors I know who are cisgender white men at this point are having harder time finding work right now because the studios and the powers that be and everybody want BIPOC and women creators over them now because it's flipped to a degree. It's part of it is because they want to avoid Twitter backlash. So a good example is, and I can't be specific, I have a writer who was passed over, a friend who was passed over for a job because the lead of the story was a Latinx male, and they wanted a Latin writer for that story. So they passed him over despite liking his writing samples more for somebody who was of the persuasion of the lead of the story, like the lead character of the story, to make sure to hedge themselves against Twitter backlash of someone calling them out for having a white writer to write about the Latin experience. So, and that entirely makes total sense to me, at least in terms of, the companies, especially the streamers and the people with the big money who really stand to lose a lot if they get caught up in, it's honestly, it's cynical business decisions in my mind, like in terms of they're just trying to avoid the backlash, but in doing so, they flipped it a little. At least, again, this is just from my experience and from other people I know who have like literally had their agents say to them, you should take this job because there's not a lot of opportunities for a white guy anymore, which is ridiculous to hear because I guarantee you, if you ask the BIPOC about the person about this or a female creator, they're going to say it's how hard it is for them, and they're right. They're probably completely right. In fact, I'm sure they're right. But it is starting to shift. So my advice would be just keep working, keep creating stuff, and keep trying to get as many meetings as you can, because the companies are definitely looking for that. They absolutely are looking for that. So the hard work that's been done over the last 5 to 10 years to push that conversation to the forefront and actually make things change is starting to bear fruit to a degree, from what I can tell. So, push and push and push and push, the same as anybody has to push. And I hope that pans out for them. I don't want to say the wrong thing here, because I firmly believe that everybody should have the same opportunities and as anyone else. And there is a conversation to be had about nepotism and people who grow up around the business and have parents or family that work in the business having more opportunities than people who don't. And people with rich parents have more opportunities than they don't. And then that gets even harder when they're a BIPOC creator or a woman or whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of nuance to this conversation that I don't want to get too in depth into, because it's not, I can talk about it, but it's not necessarily my place to talk about it. And I don't want to say the wrong thing, because I don't want to be misunderstood in that I fully support the mission to bring equality to a business that has been very one-sided over the years. But I would say that compared to 5 years ago, you're in a better place. You just are. It's not perfect yet, but believe me, the many institutions and many distributors have been working very, very hard to try and balance those scales. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there are still shitty things that happen and people that get passed over because of old systemic issues and because of, frankly, racism and sexism, which exists on an individual level with people throughout the business. But it's definitely better. And there's no reason for you to stop yourself from trying to pursue a career because you think that you're going to be passed over anymore, because the opportunities are out there. You just kind of have to work. But again, that's the wrong thing to say too, to some degree, because there definitely are people who just working at it aren't necessarily going to bring them to the position they need to be, or they want to be, or they dream to be. Because not everybody makes it in this business. Plain and simple, like they just don't, and it's terrible. But to me, it's the same thing as like not everybody makes it as a published author. Not everybody makes it as, there's lots of reasons why people don't make it, And I do believe that systemically, there's definitely people who are being held back because of who they are, where they're from, where their financial status is, what connections they have or they don't, the color of their skin, any of that. That happens, but less so than 5 years ago. It's getting better.
Certainly the downside of a relationship is that, you have a niche, and that niche you may be filled with, cisgender white men. It just, because of that's who you've grown up with in film school, or that you become to know. So it does take that actively seeking those relationships from the other side as well. But I do get the sense that that's happening. I mean, certainly the amount of people that have talked to me that I've seen,
that's part of my own growth too. I've tried to surround, like Life Changer. If you looked at our crew every day on set, we had far more women on set than men in terms of our actual production crew surrounding me. It was Abby and I, and then like our entire organizational team, and a lot of the people actually working on set were all women. And like I actively started working with Serena. I wanted part of it was because most of it was because she's a good writer, and I just thought she'd be a good writing partner. She's a friend, but part of it was that I needed to grow as a writer, especially when it came to writing women, because I
thought that little clip was so. The fact that you can look back and laugh at yourself over that is great. But it's one of the things that was really there was many things that I loved about Clapboard Jungle, but I really liked the fact that it was a case of she's a great writer, it helps balance and now we are moving towards a culture that says, if you're going to write, whether it's a BIPOC or a woman, whatever, then make sure at least that there is someone looking in or helping you that can give you that authentic voice. And it's really coming across in filmmaking. I think that certainly I reviewed a film yesterday that there was a person with a condition, and a few years ago that condition is full of stereotypes on film, and this particular film, it blew out the water. It was great. But I digress. I mean, certainly Clapboard Jungle for me, there was at first when I was like, it was 100 minutes, I was like, that's a lot. But it seemed to just be a snapshot. So I was really pleased to hear that you have an 8-part series. So what kind of topics can we look forward to? This is your chance to obviously flagrantly promote that product and talk about this more.
We're in post-production on Clapboard Jungle, the series right now. And it's actually a completely different format to the feature film. My story's not in it at all. There's no personal angle for me whatsoever. I mean, I think in one of the crowdfunding episode, there'll be a little segment because, there's not an entire episode of crowdfunding. There's an episode on fundraising, but we shot because we did a crowdfunding campaign for Clapboard Jungle, so we shot that whole process. So part of that's going to be in the series. But basically, it's 8 episodes, and every episode is a specific topic that guides you through the state of the business is the pilot. So it's just a structure of where things are and an overview of where things were and where things are going to the best of our ability. And then every episode is a specific topic on the process of getting a film made and then out to the business, and then closing off on the legacy of creators and the future of the business and how things are going to change. And the goal is to have it done and ready for delivery to our partners, who I'm not mentioning because we're still negotiating, by midsummer. So we're still in post. It's a lot of work. But we did shoot 120 interviews during the production of Clapboard Jungle. And so if you did the math, the feature film was 98 minutes. We didn't fit everybody into the movie. I think there's about 25 to 30 interviews that aren't even in the film that we have sort of sitting on hard drives right now. There will be more of those in the series itself. So there's lots of stuff that hasn't been used yet. There's even 5 hours of extended interviews on the Clapboard Jungle Blu-ray coming out soon. In April through Arrow, and that 5 hours of extended interviews, I very strategically edited that 5 hours, so not a single word or almost nothing that gets said in those extended interviews is in the series either. So it'll all be new content. But it's meant to be like a film school in a box to an extent. It's something you can sit and watch as an aspiring filmmaker and just learn more. That's really, it's an educational series ultimately.
Which is fantastic, and you know, definitely for anyone who wants to watch Clapboard Jungle, I know it's available on streaming, but it's also one of the reasons I'm talking to you is because it's appearing at a Grimmfest Easter edition. Grimmfest is the festival where I started meeting people as a fan, and I've grown from there. So it's it's Manchester based. So so we'll be, you know, it will be great to see you there as well. But you know, thank you so much for your time. You know, clearly it's so wonderful to talk to people who are so passionate about filmmaking and that will share the knowledge. So for you to round up all these horror masters, and not only in Clapboard Jungle but in the series as well, and you know, bring content that whilst there'll be some aspects that will be familiar advice to filmmakers, there's a lot of new aspects as well. So you know, it's definitely one for people, anyone who's thought that, yeah, I want to make a movie. But have you got any final thoughts before?
No, I mean, this has been 90 minutes, so I think I've said most of what I need to
it's
say.
another film.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't really have any closing thoughts. I just hope everybody this year has as safe as possible a year, and we get back to some degree of functioning society by the end of the year. That's my hope. But I mean, we'll see. That's to get a little bit more outside the film business for a bit, and just to say that it's been a really rough year for a lot of people, and I hope sunny skies start to pop up toward the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much.